5 years before, my life collapsed. 25, ready to wed Sarah, my high school sweetheart. Through thick and thin, we had been together for nearly 10 years. Our wedding was meant to represent the pinnacle of our common aspirations. The unimaginable then occurred. In love and expecting a baby, Mark, my older brother, dropped a bomb on me. Their relationship, apparently, started soon after Sarah and I got married. Ever the charmer, Mark admitted his affections for her. Sarah, apparently, had been harboring covert feelings for him too. The reduction in loyalty is severe. Not only had my brother slept with my fiancée, but God knows how long they had been flirting and prowling behind my back at family events. To exacerbate the damage, my mother in particular allied with them. She was pregnant, hence they advised me to swallow it, accept their choice, and leave Sarah alone. I suffered greatly. My family turned away from me, and my world broke. Unable to pardon their betrayal and their obvious disrespect for my emotions, I stopped all communication with them. Second part, the accident and the ridiculous demand. 5 years went by. I reconstructed my life, saw therapists, and aimed forward. Then, out of the blue, my mother called. Mark had been in a terrible automobile accident. The physicians were not encouraging. He was in a coma. My first response was one of concern. All the same, he was my brother. Then, though, my mother demanded something ridiculous. She wanted me to live with Sarah and her son, basically substituting for Mark's father role. I started to flabbergaze. This was her demand following 5 years of quiet. She hung up when I told her she was insane. Later, hoping for some sort of logic, I tried chatting with my father, but he reflected what my mother had said. He stated I was family, Sarah and I had a history, and I ought to get moving. I stood mute. Their ludicrous reasoning and total lack of compassion were amazing. I thought I was in an odd other reality. Part 3. Anxiety and Aftermath. Starting to seep in were remorse and fear. Was I mistaken in turning down? Was I being conceited? A couple of close pals confided in me and convinced me I was doing morally. They brought to me the suffering my family had inflicted, as well as their abandonment of me when most needed. Once more I blocked my parents and attempted to concentrate on my life. But the news of Mark's illness, the guilt, and my parents' pressure were wearing me down. I returned to medicine after beginning anxiety episodes. To exacerbate things, I discovered from relatives that my parents were fabricating stories about me, portraying me as the villain who turned away from helping his family through difficult times. I became enraged. Once they had wrecked my life once, they now aimed to discredit me. Fourth, the confrontation and ongoing cruelty. One day, my mother arrived at my front door. She said she wanted to atone and heal relations, but she turned on me as soon as I showed my hurt and disappointment, screaming about how unappreciative I was and how I should be happy even considered as family. She called me insufficiently emotional in response to Mark's accident. She chastised me for failing to advocate for Sarah and her son. It was an alien and infuriating encounter. At last I snapped, told her to go, and closed the door in her face. The abuse went on. At 5 a.m, my father screamed about how I was a bad son and how he wanted me never to have been born. They were tenacious, driven to have me the scapegoat for their own distorted story. Part 5. A last update and a glimmer of hope. At last, some encouraging news arrived. Mark seemed to be improving. He was on the route to recovery and out of the coma. Not just for him, but also for myself. I experienced a flood of relief. Perhaps today the pressure and the craziness would stop. Not so sure. Trying to turn the rest of the family against me, my parents kept their campaign against me under progress. However, this time it failed. My cousins backed me since they knew the truth. Part 6. Getting on and at peace. I'm living in Germany 3 years later, starting over. Apart from the most crucial peace of mind, I have a great partner, a rewarding job, and I'm happier than I have ever been. I haven't spoken to my folks in years. Mark recovered totally, and Sarah even came to apologize to me. I accepted because I was at last free from their turmoil, not because I cared anymore. Though the trip was protracted and agonizing, I came out stronger and smarter. I discovered that family is not necessarily defined by blood, and that perhaps the most crucial act of love is self-preservation. 5 years elapse, 5 quiet years, 5 years of piecemeal, agonizingly rebuilt life. I visited a therapist, concentrated on my work, and gradually began to heal. Sarah and Mark's betrayal's agony subsided. then a quiet aching and a residual sensation of incredulity took front stage. My phone started to ring then. That was my mother. My gut closed. Though I almost missed it, curiosity and maybe a morbid feeling of obligation drove me forward. Tears clogged her voice, which was faltering. Mark had suffered a rather bad accident. Intoxicated motorist. Front-on collision? Concussion. Not much hope was being given by the doctors. Shock followed by a surge of something like sympathy was my first response. He was my brother, despite all. For his wife and child, as well as for my parents confronting this dream, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of grief. Then, though, arrived the request, the unimaginable, ridiculous demand that froze my blood. She urged me to live with Sarah and her son, to be with them, to help them, to basically replace Mark. I said hollowly, to take his place? Yes, she said, crying. He may not. He is not. My ears let me know nothing but disbelief. 5 years of silence followed their casting aside of me like a broken toy, and this was what they wanted? To employ me to cover the vacuum left by the man who had taken my fiancée and wrecked my life? Hot and blazing, anger shot through me. Are you out of your mind? I said, my voice shaking with fury. After what they did to me? After how you all treated me? You expect me to just step in and perform happy families? She stammered about Sarah being alone, and tried to convey her grandchild needed a father figure, but I was not paying attention anymore. My heart thumping in my chest, I hung up shaking hands. Later on in the day, I phoned my father. Possibly he would be more reasonable. Perhaps he would have understanding. Not so sure, though. His speech tinged with a subtle desperation, mirroring my mother's feelings. She needs you, son, he begged. You are family with Sarah. You have history with her. Family. The name seemed like a nasty joke. 5 years ago, they treated me like family. Mark was their chosen golden child, instead of their own son. Now they expected me to tidy their mess. Feeling numb and confused, I hung up the line. It was amazing, their distorted reasoning and total lack of empathy. I thought I was caught in an outrageous and nasty dream. The next several days were a haze of uncertainty and dread. The words of my parents kept coming back to me, a constant chorus of obligation and remorse. Was I wrong in turning down? Was I acting selfishly, without compassion? Questions bit me, whispering sneaky uncertainty in the still hours. I told a few close friends, the ones who had supported me through the first loss and seen my family betrayed. Their expressions marked with empathy and concern. They listened carefully. You owe them nothing, friend Jake replied in a stern voice. They chose him. They chose their golden child over you. Don't let them manipulate you now. 5 years ago was their decision. His comments were like a salve on my unprocessed emotions. My other friends reflected his feelings, reminding me of the suffering I had gone through, the evenings I had spent drowning in grief and rage, the years it had taken to reconstruct my life. They abandoned you when you most needed them, my buddy Lisa angrily reminded me. Their backs turned away from you, and now they expect you to come running? Don't you dare. Their help was like a lifeline, a reminder that my emotions were legitimate, that I wasn't alone. Once more, I blocked the numbers of my parents, therefore removing the bonds holding me to their poisonous expectations. But Mark's illness tormented me much of the time. The guilt stayed, a continual shade in the brilliant sunshine of my newly acquired independence. Then the anxiety began to slink in, sneaky and stifling. Nightly sleeplessness gave place to restless days. I lost my appetite. My concentration strayed. The panic episodes came back. Unwanted guests from a past I had left behind. The familiar tablets were a sobering reminder of my vulnerability. I found myself grabbing for the bottle of anti-anxiety medicine I hadn't touched in years. To exacerbate the situation, I discovered from relatives that my parents were occupied casting me as the villain. They were telling everyone I was a cold-blooded, unappreciative son who had turned away from Mark in the hospital and that I had stated he deserved what happened. Rage ran hot and bitter through me. Once, they had destroyed my life. Now they were trying to tarnish my name, so contaminating the reservoir of support I had discovered with my extended family. Backed into a corner, and without any way out from their unrelenting assaults, I felt like a wounded animal. Their words, lies, and manipulations threatened to crush me, to pull me back into the darkness I had battled so hard to flee. My mother showed up on my front lawn one evening as the sun sank below the horizon and created sweeping shadows across my yard. I hadn't seen her in years, and the sight of her, her face marked with anxiety and a trace of desperation made me tremble. She started with apologies, her voice shaking and her eyes full of what looked to be real regret. She talked of regret, of how she and my father had let their fear and rage distort their judgment, of how they had not been thinking clearly. I listened, my heart in my chest a tight knot. Part of me yearned to believe her, to welcome the prospect of atonement, of at least some closure at last. But another side, the wounded, cautious side, held back against more damage. I spoke then, a faint but forceful voice. I told her about the suffering they had caused, the years of struggle and loneliness, the still simmering resentment under the surface. I mentioned the lies they were disseminating and the way they were rewriting the story, therefore rendering me the villain in their sad story. Her manner changed as I spoke. The regret vanished, then a flash of wrath replaced it, a defensive tightening of her jaw. "You should be happy we even consider you family," she said, raising her voice. "After the manner you handled Mark's accident," she then attacked my lack of feeling and my refusal to be there for Sarah and her son. That was an odd and frustrating charge. "I never wished him any harm," I responded, my voice trembling with restrained anger. "But I won't be your scapegoat. I won't be manipulated into performing the part you have all assigned me." My statements appeared to anger her even more. She started a frenzy accusing me of being unappreciative, callous, and selfish. She threatened to cut me off totally and bring the whole family against me. Enough had been spoken. "Get out," I ordered, my voice low and lethal. "Simply leave my house." She kept ranting, but I turned away and went inside, slamming the door shut behind me. I could hear her screaming from the porch, her words muffled by the thick wood, but I didn't care anymore. I had finished. The abuse didn't stop there either. 2 days later, my father called. 5 in the morning, and the sharp ringing of my phone startled me back to consciousness. He started a verbal attack, his voice heavy with resentment, charging me with being a horrible son, a shame to the family. He yelled, "I wish you'd never been born," his words like knives to my heart. "You're a nasty, unappreciative wretch. I'll make sure no one in the family ever speaks to you again." He left me shaking with fury and hurt as he hung up before I could even react. Their violence had no limitations. They were resolved to break me, punish me for their own errors, their own warped conception of justice. Their strategies failed this time, though. My voice, my strength, had found me. I would not be their victim going forward. I would fight back with the subdued dignity of someone who understands their value, not with rage and violence. I would transcend their slights, lies, attempts at control, and manipulation. With or without them, I would heal, move on, and find pleasure. As it always did, time marched forward. The weeks after my parents' outbursts were a rainbow of feelings. I battled anger, hurt, uncertainty, and a residual disbelief, yet among the turbulence a fresh sense of resolve started to grow. I would forbid their winning. Their venom wouldn't allow me to enter my soul. Their warped view of reality would not define me. I concentrated on my work, giving assignments that tested and fulfilled me with my whole attention. I got back in touch with old acquaintances, looked for fresh events, and gently, tentatively started to investigate the realm of dating once more. And then one day, word leaked that changed the tide. Mark was awake. He was healing. Relief flooded over me, a surge of pure, unvarnished delight. Not just for him, but also for me. Maybe today the strain, the constant pestering, will at last stop. But my folks seemed not to be very readily discouraged. Trying to turn family against me, they kept their campaign against me, putting their poison into their ears. But this time, their attempts came flat. Seeing through their lies, my extended family, the aunts, uncles, and cousins who had seen my suffering and helped me over the years, saw. Knowing the truth, they resisted being influenced by my parents' distorted story. Their relentless support was like a lifeline, a reminder that I was not by myself. It provided the will to at last cut off all contact with my parents. I disabled their emails, numbers, and social media profiles. Like weeds from a garden, I removed them from my life so that I may at last breathe freely, grow, and blossom free from their poisonous impact. And flourish I did. My career took me to new heights and presented chances I never would have dreamed of. I met someone, a woman, who really saw me for who I was, warts and all. In sharp contrast to the self-serving and manipulative folks I had known as family, she was gentle, empathetic, and fiercely devoted. I felt tranquility I hadn't known in years right with her by my side. With all its suffering and treachery, the past started to disappear and was replaced in a hopeful present and a future full of possibilities. One day, as I was getting ready to start a fresh journey, a job offer over the ocean, to a new country, a new life, Sarah showed up on my front porch. She arrived carrying apologies, her voice strangled with feeling and her eyes full of sadness. She talked of Mark's rehabilitation, of his guilt and shame, of her own. She talked of how she had violated my confidence, how she had wronged me, and how she wished she could go back in time and right things. I listened. My heart seemed oddly quiet. Though it was all there, the hurt and the rage were no longer able to control me. I had gone on. I forgive you, my voice steady, but I do not need your apology. I do not need anything from you. She stared at me, her eyes darting over mine as though she were attempting to evaluate the accuracy of my statements. And I knew at that same instant that I meant it. From them, I really needed nothing. I had discovered my own family, my own happiness, my own road forward. Leaving behind the shadows of the past, I felt a release I had never experienced as I climbed on the plane. I was free, not bound by their expectations, their manipulations, their lies, free to craft my own story, to design my own fate, to at last lead a life exactly mine. Germany specifically, a land of rolling hills, old-growth woods, and energetic cities. It turned into my haven where I could embrace the future and let the past weigh less. The echoes of past hurts seemed to be carried away by the whispering of the wind in the tall trees, then replaced with calm and belonging. My job flourished. The challenges excite me, the successes boost my confidence. I discovered a rhythm to life, a balance between the pressures of my job and the simple pleasures of discovering my new surroundings. Marveling at centuries-old buildings, I meandered along cobblestone streets. Breathing in the clean air, I hiked over lush forests, feeling the ground underneath anchor me in the present. And in the middle of this fresh life, I discovered love, not the flaming, passionate sort that had engulfed me in my childhood, but rather a love that was consistent, encouraging, and real. Alara, my girlfriend, was a woman of quiet power and soft wisdom, a breath of fresh air. She listened without judgment, providing solace and support. Her presence was like a cool-off on my tired spirit. With Alara, I created a house, a haven of laughter and dreams shared. Hand in hand, we toured the German countryside, finding secret waterfalls, little towns, and stunning views. Over hot pots of aromatic stew, we cooked together and laughed and told stories. Reading novels aloud, we nestled up on the sofa. Her voice was a soothing symphony in the peaceful evenings. Years passed, and like far-off thunder following a storm, the memories of my family's treachery faded. The wrath gave way to a peaceful acceptance. I came to see that forgiveness meant releasing myself from the bonds of resentment, not about endorsing their behavior. I never had another conversation with my folks. The sporadic updates from relatives presented a picture of their life. Mark fully recovered, Sarah and he seemed happy, and my parents were getting older, and the weight of their own decisions seemed to dampen their once vivid vigor. Still, their life was not of interest to me. My own tribe, my own family, my own pleasure had come to me. Her family, who greeted me with wide arms, the friends I developed in Germany, they were my chosen clan, my support system, my anchor. One beautiful autumn day, as Alara and I meandered around a park ablaze with fall colors, a great sense of thanks washed over me. I had traveled a long and difficult road, one rife with suffering and treachery, but it had guided me here, to this moment, to this life bursting with love, calm, and satisfaction. The whispers of the breeze carried a resilient and hopeful message. The past was a narrative scrawled on the sand, gradually erasing with every tide. The future was a blank canvas, just ready to be covered with the vivid hues of my own choosing. I also knew I was at last free, as I gazed out at the golden leaves glittering in the sunlight, free to embrace the beauty of the present moment, free to build a future full of joy and significance, free to live a life that honored the spirit of the ancestors, a life guided by the wisdom of the earth, a life that was really and genuinely mine.